2 o'clock in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. On the Iranian coast, a massive Bavar 373 radar array slowly rotates. It locks onto its target. Deep within the launch tubes, the Sayed anti-aircraft missiles finish locking in their firing coordinates. 4 missiles are ready for launch. In the moment of ignition, flames engulf the launch site on the ground. The missiles punch through the container seals. They pierce the night sky at a blistering 6,400 km per hour. A speed 5 times faster than a standard rifle bullet. About 80 kilometers away, an American MQ-9 Reaper drone is circling on patrol. Its onboard warning sensors pick up the radar lock, but there is nowhere to run. This missile doesn't even need a direct hit to the fuselage to complete the kill. Once the warhead shatters, it unleashes thousands of heavy, preformed metal fragments. Like a giant shotgun blast sweeping across the sky, it tears the drone's lightweight body to shreds. One wing snaps off instantly. The fuel tank erupts in flames. This high-end drone, worth $30 million, is reduced to scrap metal in an instant. The first shots have been fired. The ceasefire agreement has become nothing more than a piece of paper. As the drone wreckage slowly sinks into the sea, behind the phosphorescent reefs of Larak Island, 16 kilometers away, a fleet of Iranian fast attack boats quietly sets out. These Paykop-class boats sail in formation under the cover of night. Every 30 seconds, another boat speeds out. From the stern of each boat, heavy iron spheres roll off into the water. These are contact trigger anchor mines, the fuse pins protruding from the mine's body. Once they brush against a ship's hull, a chemical reaction occurs inside, triggering the main explosive charge. The speedboats in the shipping lane of the strait lay down a mine blockade that is invisible to the naked eye. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard speedboat fleet waits quietly for a target, ready to test the real-world effectiveness of their blockade trap. About 3.2 kilometers to the west of the shipping lane, the ocean-going oil tanker Glorious Star, fully loaded with 2 million barrels of crude oil, was cruising slowly through the main shipping lane. The hull, heavy with its massive cargo, couldn't make quick turns or perform emergency stops. The boat unintentionally drifted into a minefield. The contact fuse of a naval mine grazed the red paint of the ship's hull. A glass vial inside the detonator shattered. The internal chemicals mixed, creating an electric spark, which instantly detonated the mine's main charge. The destructive power of the explosion was terrifying. The stern of the tanker ripped open. The keel snapped clean in two. But the Iranian speedboat squadron wasn't finished yet. They were determined to turn the sinking ship into a burning wreck to completely block the strait. A Paykop-class speedboat turned and closed in on the foundering tanker. The rail on its deck shuddered. A Nasser anti-ship missile locked onto its target. And then, it fired. The missile skimmed just 3 meters above the waves, flying low to breach defenses. It used the sea mist and the waves to hide its approach. The crew had absolutely no way to anticipate where the strike would come from. The missile slammed directly into the tanker's massive storage tank. The force of this secondary explosion was 10 times that of the first. The crude oil inside spilled out in a massive surge and caught fire. The fuel floating on the sea transformed into a vast, endless sea of fire. As this horrific tragedy unfolded, inside an air-conditioned room in Qatar, diplomats were still drafting documents. Empty talk of ceasefire agreements and peace negotiations. The negotiations on paper had long since lost any real-world meaning. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy had used the peace talks as a smokescreen, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy their ambush. Iran was certain that, while diplomatic maneuvering was underway, no one would dare to start a war. High above the strait, now lit by the raging inferno, the Iranian speedboats turned around after completing their surprise attack. They retreated at full speed toward their own coast to stay safe. The U.S. carrier strike group, on standby in the Gulf of Oman, had been monitoring the entire sudden incident. The moment the Glorious Star became a blazing torch upon the sea, the U.S. military immediately launched its counterattack. EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft were launched one after another from the carrier deck. Their wings were laden with massive electronic jamming pods. Once the jets reached their operational altitude, the entire airspace along the Iranian coast was completely blanketed by high-intensity electromagnetic jamming. Iran's Bavar 373 radar network, the core of their domestic air defense system, which claims to be able to detect all aerial targets, including stealth fighters, was left blinded by the Growler's full-spectrum jamming. The Iranian radar screens went instantly white, like a high-powered flashlight shone directly into one's eyes, making it impossible to search for any targets. However, the Iranian defense system wasn't entirely defenseless. Once the Bavar 373's onboard computer identified the interference, it immediately switched to frequency-hopping anti-jamming mode, constantly searching for available channels within the spectrum gaps. After briefly capturing a usable frequency band, a Sayed-4 missile from one of the air defense batteries burst from its tube and climbed into the sky. If it made impact, the core of the U.S. electronic warfare fleet would suffer a devastating blow. In the very first minute of the conflict, the U.S. warplanes found themselves deep in an Iranian kill zone with a clear home field advantage. The U.S. had been waiting for this exact moment to strike. Several Fa-18 Super Hornets were already standing by in the air. Each was armed with two AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. The fighters launched a volley of 8 anti-radiation munitions. Once the missile rocket motors ignited, they accelerated to 3,862 km per hour, climbing first into the upper atmosphere, then diving down along the enemy radar beams to hunt the signal source. The Iranian radar operators received the incoming missile warning, and knowing the threat posed by anti-radiation missiles, they immediately shut down their expensive Bavar 373 radar arrays, hoping that by cutting off their radio signal emissions, they could shake off the missile tracking. But the latest HARM missiles are equipped with digital memory modules. The moment the radar turned on to fire its first missile, the munitions had already locked onto the GPS coordinates of the site. Even if the radar went silent, the missiles could still strike the target with deadly precision. 4 coastal radar sites were obliterated one after another in flames. The heavy trucks carrying the radars were blasted several meters into the air, and the concrete bunkers housing the command computers were destroyed. Everything collapsed. This was the death trap laid by the U.S. military. If Iran turned on their radar, the missiles would home in on the signals. If they turned it off, the missiles would use coordinates to destroy them point blank. The entire air defense network was doomed to be wiped out. Once the air defense screen was ripped open, the Iranian offshore assault boat fleet was left completely exposed to surveillance. Paykop-class speedboats that had just finished laying mines scrambled to escape toward the shallow, near-shore waters. They were banking on the belief that the U.S. wouldn't dare open fire in waters crowded with civilian vessels. But they severely underestimated the precision strike capabilities of the U.S. military. Abandoning indiscriminate aerial bombs, the U.S. opted for high-precision guided munitions, a high-altitude MQ-9 Reaper drone, relying on its infrared electro-optical pod, locked onto the speedboats. The heat source of the engines appeared on the screen like glowing coals. The operator, 805 kilometers away, pinned a laser spot onto the fuel tank of the lead boat. A Hellfire missile was released from the wing. This munition doesn't create a massive blast that would harm nearby civilian ships. It is designed specifically to pierce armor and hulls. Traveling at 1,609 kilometers per hour, the missile struck the stern. The fiberglass composite hull stood no chance. Upon impact, it disintegrated instantly and sank into the sea. Meanwhile, an Fa-18 dropped a heavy JSOW joint standoff weapon, weighing 454 kilograms. The unpowered gliding configuration allowed the munition to fly in total silence. 3 JSOW munitions arrived at the target area simultaneously, aiming for the Iranian hovercraft landing craft preparing to enter their hidden underground bunkers. A large group of hovercraft were rushing for the beach, trying to duck into their subterranean shelters. The first munition struck the propeller compartment of the lead hovercraft. A violent explosion shredded the massive fans. The out-of-control hovercraft slammed into the beach at 129 kilometers per hour. Shattered metal and burning rubber were scattered everywhere. The entrance to the underground bunker was completely blocked by the wreckage. The remaining Paykop boats were cornered with nowhere to run. In a panic, they fired Nasser anti-ship missiles at the incoming fighters. Having lost the guidance of their shore-based radar network, the shipborne radar detection range is weak. The EA-18G is constantly maintaining electronic suppression in the air. The missile was hit by directional jamming as soon as it launched. The guidance system is malfunctioning. It circled erratically in the air until it ran out of fuel and crashed into the sea. The Super Hornets are no longer wasting expensive precision-guided munitions, diving down into low altitude, switching to the 20mm cannon. The The cannon pours out 100 rounds of heavy armor-piercing shells per second. The tracer chain grazes the sea surface, gradually closing in on the target. The heavy warheads easily punch through the fiberglass boat hull. The speedboat's cabin is taking on massive amounts of water. The boat dips as it sinks rapidly. Iran spent billions building stealth speedboats and an all-domain air defense network. The prerequisite for stealth performance is not being detected by the enemy. Once the U.S. military took out the radar system, those stealth speedboats became sitting ducks, ready to be slaughtered. The sea surface returns to calm. Only the burning oil tanker in the distance continues to blaze. The U.S. offensive did not stop there. After completely annihilating the coastal speedboat fleet, the next step is to target the shore-based foundation that the Iranian vessels rely on to survive. To keep the Strait of Hormuz open for the long term, they must root out the nerve center of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. Under Abbas, this base is built relying on 6-meter-thick reinforced concrete fortifications. The storage caverns are carved deep into the mountain. The HIMARS rocket launcher battery on the coast of the United Arab Emirates adjusts its firing stance. The rockets are not fired one by one. Within 3 seconds, 6 rounds roar out of the tubes in succession. With all their air defense radars destroyed, the Iranian forces have no warning whatsoever. The GPS-guided rockets head straight for the preset coordinates. The first round of rockets hits the port area. The large diesel fuel storage depot. Rows of massive oil tanks are detonated. The shockwave spreads outward at the speed of sound. Within 800 meters, fences and light poles are completely flattened. A chain reaction of explosions sends up a plume of black and orange fire 152 meters high. The port's power supply and fuel reserves are instantly paralyzed. Far away in the deep waters of the Arabian Sea, 322 kilometers away, the U.S. destroyer opens its vertical launch system. A massive swarm of Tomahawk cruise missiles takes to the sky. The missiles drop to a lower altitude, flying low, hugging the terrain of the buildings to maneuver, evading the remaining ground-based detection equipment. 10 Tomahawk missiles arriving at Bandar Abbas simultaneously, striking the concrete pier where the reserve fleet is docked. The munitions hit the pier's foundation directly. The power of the blast sent thousands of tons of concrete embankment sliding into the sea. The ships that couldn't evacuate in time were either crushed by the collapsing pier. Even if Iran still had reserve speedboats, they've lost their berths, fuel supplies and launch ramps. For the final phase, F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters rushed to the battlefield. Loaded with multiple AGM-154 standoff weapons, 4 munitions struck the exact same spot in a tight cluster, bombing the same point on the mountainside. The first one tore open the topsoil of the mountain. The second shattered the outer layer of concrete. The last 2 drilled deep into the cavern and detonated. The entire mountain erupted with flames. The core of the Iranian Naval Command was reduced to smoldering ruins. Their entire coastal combat system has been wiped off the map. 5 minutes after the first HIMARS volley, the EA-18G is still cruising at 30,000 feet. Monitoring the airspace over the strait, there isn't a single radar signal left on the onboard screens.